Thank you everyone for coming today to our DACA discussions. As a first item to begin, I would like to ask that any of our attendees who may need sign language interpretation sit on the left side of the room, which is my right, and we can go from there. So I should let you know, my name is Josephine Volpe, and I am the Director of the Office for Advising Development and a co-chair of the Provost Task Force on Immigration Issues, along with Dr. Amalia Payares, who's one of our panelists today. It's my pleasure to be here moderating for you, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of our task force, the provost, and our campus constituencies. We're here today as a community to talk about DACA, our responsiveness, and our ability to be responsive. And we're so very, very delighted to be working with some key partners here on the West Campus. So my first order of business is to ask Dr. Nadine Peacock to come and welcome you. Dr. Peacock is the Associate Professor of Community Health Sciences and Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at the UIC School of Public Health. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming, and thanks so much to the task force and the provost and the campus diversity office. Been amazingly responsive to our request to have some activities around this issue on the west side of campus. Really wonderful. Glad to see good turnout. Hope we get a lot online. I am, as Joey said, in the School of Public Health, and anyone who's and I also want to thank the nursing school for welcoming us to this lovely space. But anyone who wants to reach out to me, who wants to do any sort of activity around this issue, around the DACA issue, particularly on West Campus, please feel free to reach out to me, npeacock@uic.edu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peacock. I'd like to start with just a few other housekeeping items and items for today. At your chairs, for those of you in attendance, you also should know that we are streaming this live. So welcome to our attendees who may be watching from their offices or other areas. And for those of you in the room, for our Q&A, which will be a large portion of the last part of our program today, there are 3x5 cards where you can write questions if you prefer. We will be also seeking you out to raise your hand if you would like, but please do let us know by a 3x5 card if you have a question, and we will collect those and provide them to our Q&A moderator. Thank you. So we will be covering a range of topics today, and including mental health for undocumented students, care of patients, legal issues, how our faculty can be responsive to students, and addressing issues that arise in the classroom. We also will be addressing campus resources and challenges. So for the overview of the day, we will be doing our panel first. We'll have panel presentations, and then we'll have a Q&A. Our panelists are some of the folks who may work with us on the campus and partner with many of you in the communities. We will start with discussing DACA, the challenges our students face, and resources. And so it's an honor to begin by introducing my first panelist today, Tanya Cabrera. Tanya is our Associate Director of Equity and Inclusion in the Office of the Vice Provost for Diversity. In 2011, Tanya was appointed by former Governor Quinn and current Governor Rauner in 2016 to serve as chairman of the Illinois Dream Fund Commission, a role she feels will set the platform for educational access and degree attainment for undocumented students in Illinois and across the U.S. Tanya previously worked under the Vice Provost at the Illinois Institute of Technology, IIT, as the Associate Director for Minority Outreach and Undocumented Students before joining UIC in the summer of 2016. Tanya, please join us.
Thank you, Joey, and thank you for all those who are with us today and those online as well. I want to begin. We have a wide range of expertise here at the table, and I'm really thankful that we, administration, recognized the need to create a task force around this issue. So we want to begin with the university context and talk a little bit about DACA and its rescission. First, it's important to understand that as members and employees of an institution, that we are legally able to educate and provide private scholarship dollars to undocumented immigrants. I know some questions may arise of like, can they be here at the institution? Yes, they can. They have access to education just as anyone else. It's the financial restrictions that are currently an issue. So I just want to make sure that we were aware of that. And again, no state dollars are available currently to undocumented immigrants in the state of Illinois. But today we're focusing on DACA and its rescission. And I just want to make sure that we understand that DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was an executive order enacted in 2012 under the Obama administration in response to no passage of a federal legislation, the DREAM Act. And in this federal program, it allowed undocumented immigrants access to a 2-year work permit. It also protected them from a 2-year deportation, but this also allowed students to get a job and not falsify their information or use a false social security number, open up a bank account, get a driver's license. So it created a pathway to some opportunities for them. And on September 5th, our current president rescinded DACA, leaving a 1-month window open of an opportunity for renewal for those who, until March 2018 when it expires. Individuals whose DACA expires after March 2018 will be able to retain their work permit until it expires. So there were a large population of students who were eligible for renewal, but there was also another population that perhaps missed their deadline, or earlier they expired and they weren't eligible for this opportunity for renewal. And after this, once the permit is expired, after this, the response to DACA, the federal level, there's a range of bills currently in Congress right now, and that we'll get into a little bit later, and why it's so important that we educate ourselves, not only for current students, but for prospective students, as well as faculty and staff as we service these students across campus. So a little bit more about DACA. It's the 800,000 individuals were granted DACA, and this is huge, right? But it also rescinded by the Trump administration on September 5th. And the reason why we're having these discussions is to make sure that we're creating resources to support these students to successfully matriculate through the institution, those who are here and those who will be coming in future for prospective students. When I meet with undocumented students across this campus, and we have a very diverse population, 87% of the students that I met with stated that financial funding was the main barrier towards their degree completion, whether they could go part-time versus full-time, and also the mental health under the current socio-political climate, how that has impacted their fear, anxiety levels being very high, and how that has affected them academically, emotionally, being able to function inside the classroom and outside of the classroom. Another issue that students brought up was the access to legal aid, not understanding what options they had, and financially not being able to afford seeking legal options to discuss some opportunities for them. And in my current role within the Office of Diversity and through the leadership of Dr. Sharul Turkal, we've been conducting trainings across campus. I've visited classrooms, come out to departments. I'm still willing to come out to anyone on campus and on off campus. I'm not too far from UIC, so I also have some evening options available. But please feel free to contact me via email or directly on my phone. I've given students my office line, but also after work hours and out the weekend, my calls are forwarded to my cell phone. I feel like we need to make sure that students are aware of all the resources and that they have access to contact someone in their time of need. We also have counseling services, and Dr. Hermes is going to talk a little bit more about that, but we want to make sure that students understand that there are safe spaces available on campus, and it's important to make sure that they have someone to talk to about what they're dealing with. And we do have these counseling services available throughout the day, after hours, and on weekends, and I'll leave Dr. Hermes to discuss that more. And I'm really excited. One of the recommendations from the Task Force on Immigration Issues was to hire an immigration lawyer. So I'm really thankful for Student Legal Services, Ted Kwan, Linda Deanna, and as well as administration to appointing a position to hire Bonita Cho, who's going to talk a little bit more. But now we have access for our current students to have speak to an immigration lawyer, and even those undocumented students, but also to those students who are citizens who may have parents who are undocumented. They can also seek legal information from Student Legal Services, and now that we have Benita on board. And she'll be seeing students on Tuesdays in the afternoon for availability. So start calling her. We've had for a few years now, we've been leading the bill for the Illinois Access Bill. It's a student bill that allow undocumented students access to at a four-year public institution to merit-based tuition waivers, financial funding basically, to help afford attending a UIC. But this is big because it's not just UIC, but it impacts other four-year public institutions in Illinois. And this could really set the platform for other states to adopt. And we're hoping that this is something at the federal level, if we're not doing anything in the next 6 months, that we can at least allow an opportunity to change the legislation to allow financial funding to be provided to these students. And we're waiting to hear whether or not this bill will be in the veto session, or we're going to wait to the spring. But this is something that UIC has been leading. Students have been leading this charge to begin with, and we're really proud to be at the table with them moving this forward. A lot of questions with regards to what would happen if ICE were to come on campus. And this is something we talk about in the trainings. We want to make sure that you understand that if ICE was to come on campus, and they do from time to time for international services students, but we want to make sure that people are aware that they could only come on campus with a judicial warrant if they are seeking to detain someone. So we only accept a judicial warrant, and the first point of contact, and the link here is to their first response plan for UIC police, to contact the UIC police. Their contact information is there. And lastly, the UIC dream.uic.edu website, we've listed resources, thanks to Joey and our team on 13, to updating the resources on the dream.uic website. Contact information, additional resources are available there. I've listed the Immigrant Legal Resource Center for information at a national level. If you're looking for information, a nice resources for something local, for things that are happening across Illinois. The Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights is having their symposium next Tuesday at Rush University. Not sure if it's too much of a walk, but that's happening next Tuesday. And Dana will talk more about the Coalition for Immigrant and Mental Health. She's part of that committee, and I'm thankful that we have her at the table here as well. Thank you again for joining us. Appreciate you, and look forward to your questions later on throughout the presentation.
Thank you very much, Tanya. So our next panelist is Dr. Dana Rush, who is Assistant Professor of Clinical Psychiatry at the Institute for Juvenile Research. Dr. Rush's clinical work as a child psychologist and her community-engaged research focus on mental health promotion for families living in urban poverty, with a primary interest in immigrant origin families, makes her an excellent contributor to discuss how undocumented status can affect mental health and well-being. Dr. Rush.
Hi, everyone. So Tanya mentioned the Coalition for Immigrant Mental Health. I would like to acknowledge that they have really informed a lot of this work, and there are some resources at the back table that will link you to our website that gives you a lot of mental health resources, some training opportunities, some ways to get involved. So please pick up that resource at the back table, and you can find some more information about that. So I wanted to just, those of you in the room who know me, I know some of my colleagues are here, know that I like to kind of put things in context. So I just want to take a step back. And for those of you who know, this is a review. For those of you who don't, it's a primer. So when we think about the U.S. immigrant population, based on 2015 statistics, about 52% were non-citizens, so non-naturalized, which includes legal permanent residents, those with unauthorized status or undocumented immigrants, and also those on kind of temporary visas. So that might be a student visa, a work visa. About 2/3 of the immigrant population tends to reside in kind of typical gateway states, Illinois being one of them. In Illinois, 14% of our state population is immigrant origin. So 1 in 7 people are an immigrant here in our state. So I think that's important to recognize. And we have almost 18 million children under the age of 18 who have an immigrant parent. And as a child psychologist and someone who works in the community and focuses on kids' mental health, that's a pretty important statistic. When we think about the undocumented population specifically, these estimates are probably underestimates, but based on 2012 estimates, there are about 11 million immigrants with undocumented status living in the US. In Illinois, this makes up about 4% of our state population, so about a little over 500,000. And we have in our K through 12 private and public schools here in the nation, we have about, I don't know, 4 million kids who have at least one undocumented parent. The majority of these youth are US citizens, so they're living in mixed status families. And this is a really important point. When we talk about undocumented status, this is not really an individual level factor. This is more of a family kind of shared risk context. And so Tanya spoke about this, but in terms of DACA eligible or DACA applicants, we had close to 2 million as of 2016. This doesn't include those who were not yet eligible due to age requirements. And we had about 96,000 in Illinois, and a large number of them in Cook County. So this is an issue that I think statistics just sometimes help us put this in a framework. And so you'll see actually too that these states that are darker green had the highest number of DACA applicants and DACA eligible, and it's not surprising and kind of overlaps with those states that typically have larger immigrant populations. But we do see, like other places in the Midwest, the Southeast, just an exponential growth in the immigrant population. So I don't want to leave those states out, but wanted to highlight that we are in a state that this is a pretty prominent issue. So this is a busy slide, but just wanted to put mental health in a larger framework when we're talking about immigrant mental health. So a lot of times we're focused on what we have on that third column, so what happens post-migration once folks are kind of resettled here in the US. But I want to think a little bit, or just put it in your minds to think a little bit about what happens before you decide to leave your home country, what happens during migration or during flight. Really sets the stage and often compounds stressors that occur post-migration. And I'm going to speak a little bit about one of those, which is the undocumented status stressor. But in terms of mental health, we do know that kids who've experienced a separation, for example, during migration from a parent or a significant caregiver are much more likely to be anxious or depressed. And we see that that holds true also for parents in terms of their depression levels, their level of acculturative stress. And so this is important to note when we're thinking about mental health and wellness. When we think about undocumented status particularly, we have a growing literature to document that this has a pretty significant impact on health outcomes, oftentimes due to having an unusual, or excuse me, not a usual source of care. And when you do have seek health services, for example, being more likely to have a negative experience with that interface. There's often a lot of mistrust and fear about seeking formal sectors of care, oftentimes due to a fear of what happens if my status is revealed or the status of someone in my family. And fear of deportation is actually emerging in the literature as a unique and very significant predictor of stress. And we all know the relationship, the negative relationship between stress and health and stress and mental health. And that really holds true most strongly for undocumented males. And so I do also want to note that 32% of documented immigrants report avoiding an activity or seeking an institution for help because of fear of deportation. So this is not something that only affects someone with undocumented status, but those who are documented as well, again, given that kind of family level risk. So thinking about kids, we know that having an undocumented parent or being undocumented yourself not only leads to difficulties in insurance status, but we know that, again, as a mental health researcher, these youth are much less likely to receive mental health care. So this really contributes to longstanding mental health disparities. So again, we can't rely on the mental health sector alone to meet these needs. We have to really think about building capacity within our communities, our universities, our schools to help support these families. This is a pretty busy slide. There's lots of references listed on the bottom of this. If you're interested, please email me and let me know. But there's probably within the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a growing literature to document the role of undocumented status and kind of developmental trajectory. So how does this affect your social, emotional, educational development? And so I think it's important to recognize that about 65,000 high schoolers every year are graduating from our schools who are undocumented. And so when we are at higher ed institutions like UIC, I think it's important to think about the numbers of students who were not DACA eligible, who did not receive DACA, who are going to be kind of matriculating into our universities and our community settings, and how to support them. But there's also this kind of theme in a lot of the narratives about kind of marginalization, growing up in the shadows, the unintended consequences of things like the dreamer narrative that kind of indicate that you're kind of a good immigrant or you're a dreamer, but your parents weren't, these sorts of things. It really have very significant consequences for your mental health and your idea of wellness and your idea of what it means to be successful. So I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that mental health does not occur in a vacuum. We are in a very tense and harsh socio-political climate right now that not only affects undocumented immigrants, but lots of other marginalized communities. We do see that there's been a rise in distress, particularly among immigrant origin young adults and other marginalized young adults, including kind of increased calls to crisis hotline calls, overwhelmed counseling centers at universities, and also an increased fear about what the expanded role of ICE may be and what that means for safety and sanctuary. And again, this has very significant implications for what we think about when we think about mental health and wellness, as well as just how to be civically engaged when you're living in this context. So this is a slide that I have often used for other clinicians or social service providers, but I think it kind of rings true for all of us. So what do we do now? How do we create a supportive environment? Well, I think the first thing to do is to stay informed. So you're doing the right thing by coming here today and learning a little bit more about what's going on here at UIC. You don't know what you don't know, but also don't make promises you can't keep. There's a lot of uncertainty here, but so seek out consultation, seek resources, particularly seek legal counsel, and we're so grateful to have Benita here to talk a little bit more about that. This is particularly crucial with this topic right now. Learn about different state and local advocacy efforts so you can either become more informed about what can happen locally, but I think it also puts the national discussion in perspective. Acknowledge that there's intersection when we talk about immigrant mental health, when we talk about undocumented status and other marginalized groups, and I think our youth advocates are really leading the charge in how to weave those plans of action together, so we are kind of fighting for protection for all. And most importantly, modeling tolerance and inclusion here at UIC in our classrooms and our community work, and that includes, the language you use, the way that you create safe spaces for your students and your work units is really important. And these last two pieces, I think, are particularly important for those who are have a lot of daily contact with folks who are directly affected, for example, by the rescission of DACA, to practice self-care and model that for the people you're working with, but also creating kind of networks of support, knowing the resources that are available here at UIC. We're at an institution that's working very hard to support the students here in our community at large. So really creating those networks, I think, is going to be particularly important moving forward. And so again, I have some resource lists in the back that lists some kind of curated places to go and places to look for more information in these general areas. But I wanted to highlight three that I think are really key for mental health resources. So the Coalition for Immigrant Mental Health, we've curated a list of resources of providers, places to go, trainings that we're hosting, and then also the Illinois Childhood Trauma Coalition has a bunch of information, and so does Lurie Children's Center for Childhood Resilience. So these are really great resources if you want more on this topic. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rush. Our next panelist is Ms. Bonita Wang Cho. Bonita Wang Cho is a partner at the law offices of Chang, Cho, and Yi, and she's specialized in immigration law for the last 22 years. She is also an extra help legal assistant counsel for UIC, where she assists students with immigration matters. Currently, she's on the board for the Asian American Bar Association Law Foundation, and she is the president of the board of directors of the Cornerstone Counseling Center of Chicago. Ms. Cho is here today to talk with us about legal issues. Ms. Cho.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm here today to talk about the legal aspect and what we can do moving forward. So we know now that DACA is ending. Where do we go from here? When I have someone that has DACA come into my office and I talk to them, the first thing that we do is we talk about what's their plan going to be. It's very important for someone who has DACA to be able to find out what, if any, options they might have. I know a lot of people do their own research on the internet now. You know, a lot of people are big with WebMD, trying to self-diagnose for things. But I assure you that everybody's case is different. Everybody's has different facts in their case. So even though someone may think that their case is exactly like their cousin's case or exactly like their neighbor's case, it's most likely not true. So it's going to be really important to go seek an immigration attorney and find out where are you at, where can we go from here. And you also want to make sure that it's a attorney that specializes in immigration law. You know, you wouldn't want to go see a real estate attorney. You don't want to talk to a personal injury attorney. Immigration is a very specialized field. The statutes and regulations are really kind of complex, and there's a lot of different factors that play into whether somebody might be eligible for some form of relief. So seeking out an immigration attorney is really the important first step for DACA students. There are a lot of different things that affect whether or not somebody might be eligible for some kind of relief. The types of questions that I ask people coming into my office are, oh, how did you enter the country? It's important to find out what their educational background is, their family background. It's very important to find out if possibly their parents or other family members may have filed some other kind of immigration paperwork in the past. So these are all things that we need to find out to see if there's something that we can do for them. It is possible to legalize your status after DACA ends. I have an example of a couple cases. I have one client right now. She's a Pakistani citizen, and she has DACA right now. And we just went to her green card interview at immigration because she was able to be sponsored by a physician's office. She is a registered nurse and got her degree and her license. And she found a family practitioner willing to sponsor her as an RN. And so she is going to be able to get her green card through this sponsorship. Not everybody's going to be eligible for this. She's particularly eligible for this because her parents had previously filed another application that grandfathers her into a certain law. But that's one case where we're able to legalize her status. I have another client who, a Korean citizen, who had DACA, and she had entered without inspection, was out of status for many years, but we were able to legalize her status because through DACA, she was able to get a travel document, and she left the country and re-entered, you know, letting her have a lawful admission to the U.S., and then it ended up that her mother remarried to a U.S. citizen. So her U.S. citizen stepfather was able to sponsor her, and she's had her green card now for many years. And I think right now she's on a study abroad program in Italy. So that's another situation where we were able to help somebody that had DACA. So, you know, as some of the other panelists mentioned, I have just recently come here to UIC, and I'm really excited to get a chance to meet some of these students and talk to them about their immigration cases. So if you know someone who has never sought immigration consultation before, now is definitely the time to do it. You want to be proactive. You don't want to just sit back and just wait for something to happen. So in addition to getting legal consultation, what's really important, I think, for DACA students is to make sure that they know what their rights are. Due process still exists. You know, in most cases, even if you are out of status and have been out of status for a long time here in the United States, ICE just can't pick you up and put you on a plane and send you out of the country right away. You have due process rights. You know, most people have the right to go in front of an immigration judge and see what options are available to them. So if the situation would arise, you know, God forbid somebody were to detain a DACA student, it's important to make sure that you are able to tell them that you want the chance to go in front of an immigration judge. You know, don't sign away any of your rights and give up your right to go in front of an immigration judge. That's really important. You know what, I didn't bring it with me today, but the ACLU has a really great, oh, it is back there? Okay, so in the back on the table, there's a little cheat sheet that ACLU prints out that's kind of a know your rights cheat sheet. So it kind of lists out what you can do and what you can say if you were ever stopped by the police or immigration, and reminds you of what your rights are. So if you think that you're interested in reading about this, or you know somebody that might find that helpful, please take one of those sheets in the back. You know, and I think the last thing that I usually tell somebody that comes to my office is that, you know, maybe we've gone through the whole consultation and it looks right now that maybe there's not a lot of options available to that individual. I try to remind them that, you know, immigration a lot of times is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It could take years to kind of try to figure out how to legalize someone's status, or you know, try to finding a way to be able to get your permanent resident status. I mentioned before, if you get into immigration court proceedings, those proceedings are very backlogged. It could take years to have your case go through immigration court. You know, in 3 or 4 years from now, we might be in a different situation. Maybe we are eventually going to get some kind of comprehensive immigration reform. So I think it's just really important to let people know you just have to take things one step at a time, one day at a time, and you know, we'll have to wait and see what's going to be available to them in the future. That concludes my portion. I hope to see some people coming into the office and meeting them so I can talk to them about their cases. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next panelist is someone I am very honored to introduce because she will provide a perspective from our students. And so today we have Ms. Janeth Vasquez here, who is a master's student in our Jane Addams College of Social Work. Her concentration is in community health and urban development. She's here really to provide us with a student perspective and discuss how we as UIC community members can be more responsive to students' needs. Janeth.
Hi, thank you. So I am a first-year graduate student, and it's sometimes it's hard for me to even say it. I am very privileged, and I have the support of my parents and community. But as an institution, I think that it took me a while for me to understand how to get to the Jane Addams of social work and how to apply as an undocumented student. So I am granted DACA, and as you probably have heard that it has been eliminated, I still have my permit for about, I believe, until 2019. But as you know, that the social work field requires us to be licensed, just similar to any like lawyer and medical students. So I am in the process of finding out what those options are and how to get my license. But in terms of institutions, I think that I have to, in the social work field, I think it's a very different program and in a different building that sometimes I feel a little isolated. So I am very glad that I have the support from the Latino Cultural Center, from Lattice and other programs. But I think that in my own experience, I would have kind of liked to see more of the social work field or social work students. And it's very hard for me personally to be involved in activities because the social work has a very strict curriculum where I have to do an internship and I have to, on top of my classes and on top of work. So I am pretty packed for the whole day. But I am very fortunate to have faculties, members who have shared in their classrooms about DACA, but I think that as employees, of this institution, it would be helpful to have Tanya come to the office or to the classroom and speak to, because maybe a lot of professors might not know exactly what is going on. Yeah, so I think that after the announcement, I had in my family, we had a very different way or dynamic of how to handle this. I had to still be in school, and while my brother was also in school, but I think that it's important to understand the mental health problem that it exists within the DACA or the undocumented immigrant population. There has been anxiety and depression and things that are just unknown to us because we don't know what's going to happen or where our future is going to stand. Like I said, I think I'm very, I have a very support system in terms of my parents who have been keeping me and telling me to keep going in my education. But just thinking back in the institution, I'm really helpful that there's spaces where I can go and seek support, where there's counseling services. And I'm really happy that you are here and to learn more about how to better support us as students. And if there's any questions later in the panel, then I'm happy to answer as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that perspective. I think one of the most important parts that joins that perspective is the perspective of how faculty and staff can be responsive to students and what we may be wondering about how to interact and what we need to do. And so our next presenters, and how can we be responsive and supportive? So our next presenters, we have two. They are Dr. Amalia Payares and Dr. Joseph Hermes. They will be addressing how faculty can be responsive to students and concerns in the classroom. So Dr. Payares is a professor of political science and Latin American and Latino studies. She's also the director of the Latin American and Latino studies program at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She has written extensively on social movements in Latin America and immigrant rights activism in the US. Her latest book, Family Activism, Immigrant Struggles, and the Politics of Non-Citizenship, focuses on the undocumented immigrant activism in Chicago. I did it right this time, right? And then I also would like to introduce our second panelist who's going to work together with Dr. Payares, Dr. Joseph Hermes, and he's currently the director of the Counseling Center. He's a licensed clinical psychologist in Illinois with a career that is focused on university and college mental health and wellness services. He's previously served as the director of counseling centers and as an associate dean for wellness programs, among other administrative, training, and clinical positions at universities and medical settings in the Chicago area. Dr. Payares and Dr. Hermes.
Thank you, Joey. And Joe will come in a little bit, depending. So anyhow, thank you for coming. So as the co-chair of the Immigration Task Force, we're hoping that these two forums, the one we had yesterday in the East Campus and on the West Campus, not only are a way to sort of answer your questions, but our deepest hope is that as you go on back to your units and departments, that you also become ambassadors to other staff and faculty and students in your units who might have questions. And so hopefully, we can all keep learning, especially as things are developing. So I wanted to talk about the classroom a little bit as a faculty member and as someone who has worked extensively with undocumented students. I'm also the advisor for the Fearless Undocumented Alliance, FUA, which has been on campus for a few years. And I think what I run into colleagues who have all kinds of fears. Some of them say, I don't really know anything about this, so I'd rather not talk about it in class, or not really talk to a student who wants to talk to me about this, right? Or there are people who think, we heard yesterday from one of them, that maybe they can't, that maybe they're not supposed to talk to somebody about their status, even if that person approaches you, even if the student approaches you, which is not the case at all. okay? You know, because of FERPA and because of basic ethics, you know, we should be confidential about conversations we have with our students. But this is not something that you cannot talk to a student about if a student approaches you about it. A very different issue would be if you're outing a student, right? Students vary tremendously. Some students have come out as undocumented very openly and are activists. Some students have not and do not. And so it's important to be kind of very thoughtful and careful about in what setting do you talk to a student about this, you know, ideally a private setting if they talk to you, not openly in a classroom, not calling them out, even if you know the person's undocumented, you know, not saying in the classroom, hey, you know, could you talk to, you know, to us about your situation or something like that. When people say, I don't know anything about this, or say, my class has nothing to do with this. I mean, and no, this is not a social sciences or humanities class. There's no context in which I would suddenly start talking about this. What I would say is like, well, you know, people do different things in their classes, but if you don't feel comfortable talking about it extensively, then, you know, mention it. Talk about it in a short way, or send an email to your students if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, and say that you are somebody who is concerned about this and its impact on students, and you want to be able to support students, and you're always open in office hours if a student wants to. If a student, not necessarily if a student's impacted, you can say something like, well, what about if my, you know, if somebody has a family member or anybody in, you know, their community, or they themselves are impacted, feel free to come talk to me so we can talk about, you know, what are the resources available at UIC. The other good thing about the other great thing is, even if you don't know much, you are in UIC. So there are, as you have just learned from our speakers, many resources, many options for students. So the best thing is to then inform yourself as much as possible about these resources, so that when if a student does come and approach you and does come to your office hours, you're open to talking to them about the resources. Yesterday, a student who spoke talked about a faculty member who had sent a PDF, had said in class, I'm really concerned about this. I don't know much about it, but I'm gonna find out and let you know what I know, and then shared a PDF on the Blackboard, right? So that it was a way in which to letting students know, I'm aware and I'm supportive, and here are the resources that are available. I would say in the case that a student sort of approaches you, what I tend to think about when a student talks to me about their status, and especially around sort of what, you know, some concerns about how that might impact their lives and their performance in class and all these things, I would say I have 3 pieces of advice. One is, what is their immediate need? I mean, is there something urgent that they need right now, right? And in that sense, connect them to the resource that you think might be important, right? Tania Cabrera here to my left is right. She is on 24/7. So just even having her card, just having her information and saying this is something really urgent and she would know how to help that student, let me connect them to that. In other cases, if you have become more informed and updated, and you may be able to directly help, but think about what is the immediate need. So for example, I had a student who, this is happening a lot to our students, they're being asked to be guardians. Their parents are giving them the guardianship of the younger siblings in case the parents get deported. So this student was not undocumented, was a citizen, but needed to become the guardian of her siblings because her parents are undocumented and fear deportation. So she said the parents didn't speak English and they were like in a certain part of Chicago and they really didn't have transportation. So I did some of that legwork and found out where there was a guardianship workshop in her neighborhood, right? But there are many examples. The second part is, what are their long-term needs? Like, what do you think might be coming up that you might want to be aware of? And this could also impact your class. Their performance in your class. Sometimes students who are dealing with immigration issues may not show up for a while because there's a crisis. Sometimes they need to withdraw, okay? And even though we sort of have a general sense of the rules, we've talked to the registrar's office as part of the workshop, and they said, you know, we do consider student situations. We have ways of helping them through emergency situations that might end up not hurting them as much in terms of their record or in terms of finances. But we sort of have to, again, think about, those kind of longer term options and how might we respond to them, right? And then the third thing I like to ask faculty to think about is is the student networked? And the reason I ask this is because some of our students are very networked. You could ask them, are you part of the, whatever cultural center, the Arab American Cultural Center, or do you go to the Latino Cultural Center or the Asian American Research Center? Are you a member of FUA? These things are important because the less networked the student is in terms of the potential organizations that could support them or the spaces where they could learn about more resources or safe spaces where they could go to in a moment of crisis. The cultural centers have become these centers where a lot of students go to when they learn of some news that's impacting them. The more isolated they're going to be, right? And that sort of puts, that gives you a sense of how much perhaps you might need to do to make sure they connect and let them know about some of those other resources. So they're not legal and mental health resources, but they're communities and safe spaces and organizations that people could connect to and find others who are going through what they're going through. Okay, I'll stop here.
Hi, and thank you for being here. I just want us to really recognize that, why are we here? Well, I think part of it is to understand and appreciate that for the students, which is our focus, and faculty and staff who are trying to be responsive to the students that we're discussing today, that there's been a changing scene, a changing context, that the student who has not changed who they are, what they're about, how they've been behaving, suddenly has a changed environment. We know that the political environment that's been referenced here has led to a reality and a context environment in which doors that were once open are now closed, perhaps. That I haven't changed, I haven't done anything differently, but doors that were once I could knock on and open may not be open any longer. Or I may open that same door tomorrow and find out that it's actually a dangerous door to open and to walk through or go beyond, because it's changed what's behind that door. So when you put someone in an environment in which those things become uncertain, in which there is at the very best an ambivalent reception for who they are, for the intersecting identities that one may have, and we're focused on particular pieces of identity today, can be very distressing. And a particularly important message is, regardless of personal view, the institution that we're a part of here is that you are welcome here. And I think that's important, so that in your interaction with students, both as student to student, as faculty, staff to student, is to give that message in whatever way that you can. If you haven't seen it, there's a nice video. It lasts just a minute. It's listed at the UNI Care website. The Chancellor ends that particular video, which has that message of, you are welcome here. And it speaks to the issue around immigration status or immigrant status. Regardless of that status, you are welcome here. And I think that's a really important message that we continue to give in our classrooms and in our settings. So at the very least, if you don't know what else to say, communicate that piece, because it is representing the institution that we're all a part of, and I think that's important to recognize. Pieces that I want to touch on in different ways. Dana was talking about, in general, sort of the mental health consequences of status that we're focused on today. And one of the things I've just come from is a national annual conference of counseling center directors from across the country. And one of the studies that we discussed was one coming, it's a 2015 study in the Harvard Educational Review. And they surveyed about just a little bit less than about 1,000 undocumented university and college students. And what they found is that the vast majority, 70%, are first-generation students. 3/4 are absolutely concerned about things like detainment or deportation, if not for themselves, for a family member, someone very close and known to them. We also know that the majority of them are working to support themselves, to go to college and to try and stay in college and to remain here. So part of our recognizing that is the consequences then of what that means in the context of the students who are coming to us. Immigration status is but one of an important piece of identity. There are multiple intersecting identities, which I just touched on. So what does that mean for the student who's here in front of us or in your classroom? A student who is a first-generation student is probably not supported in a family system as a resource that knows about the resources and the support that can be available in a campus environment. So you may need to extend yourself to really bring that to the student's attention. There isn't necessarily someone at home that has familiarity or experience with that environment as a first-generation student. So it may be important to recognize and to bring the attention to them of the resources that we're touching on and talking about today, to be a little more proactive in bringing that to the student's attention and not just rely on the student necessarily knowing that or getting that information or support from a family context. The other is the various cultures that may be represented in that status can also indicate what it means to try and pursue mental health services and the stigma that may be attached to that. And so it's important to recognize that the reactions that students are having to this changing environment, this maybe, we talked about post-immigration status, now maybe post-DACA status, and what that impacts a student and the emotional responses that they're having to that change is, I think, to normalize that and to say it isn't that you have some kind of particular mental health disorder or mental illness, but you're reacting to this kind of changing scene environment and uncertainty and ambivalent reception for you in this environment now in ways that are very understandable. And therefore, let's try to normalize the pursuit of the resources that students may need and find helpful, including mental health resources. So that can address and try to help the idea around stigma being a barrier to students seeking us out. We're trying at the Counseling Center and others trying to create spaces where students can feel safe to come and seek services. We did start a resource on this campus about 2 or 3 weeks ago called Let's Talk. It's an opportunity for students to seek us out in a non-clinical environment to just talk with a mental health counselor from the Counseling Center. So we're here Thursdays 4 to 6, room 235, Student Center West, right over here. That way, I'm not sure where I am, that way. For those on camera, it's over there. But we're here as a way to try and say there is a way to pursue and make contact with mental health professionals that are not necessarily stigmatizing in your contact. The other part is to appreciate maybe the flip side of that, which is when you seek mental health services as a student at UIC, that it is one of a few confidential resources, meaning that if there are concerns about safety, about status being identified or being having to be known in order to seek or receive services, that's something that is absolutely not part of what we need to know about the student, that we would share with others outside of the student's desire that that be shared with someone else, and that it is a confidential setting because of the specialization that we're offering, the mental health services that we offer, protected by law here in Illinois and elsewhere, that says those kinds of things remain within the Counseling Center. And I think that's important to recognize. Students who are coming to us as first generation may also very much be spokespersons for their families. The person who is navigating for family and adult parents and as adolescents and children, the vast majority of these students that I mentioned in the study had been in the United States for at least 15 years, so they've been functioning in that role as spokesperson for families and for parents. And as such, they may be less inclined to necessarily feel a need to identify their own needs first, to feel more invisible given their status, to stay and to remain invisible, and so not to seek a service. And so there again, as faculty and staff, to be able to give permission and to point students to and connect them to services can be an important role, even if you're not sure, have vast amounts of knowledge about what that status may mean for them. That's okay. That you say, I am interested in trying to help, you're welcome here, and let me try to assist you in whatever way I can in my role. That's an important message to continue to give. One of the pieces that as we talk about some of the struggles that students have because of this changing scene and status, is that we may forget in the environments and our contact with students to make sure that we're noting that they also bring assets to a university context and setting given their immigration status, given their DACA status. These typically can be very resilient individuals. We have an example of one sitting right with us today, and other students, the young woman who spoke with us yesterday, that they in fact bring a resilience, that they bring a dedication and commitment to social causes that are important to them, that they can be very engaged in their environments and their communities, and those are all positive strengths. As I said, many of these students are working and managing multiple roles and multiple responsibilities. It's important when a student is stressed to remind them of those assets as well, that you recognize those strengths and come from a strengths-based sort of position about that is therefore reasonable to believe that they can also adapt and find ways to manage whatever it is that they're finding distressful, uncertain, or even negative in their interactions with their environments. I do want to mention briefly, I mentioned Let's Talk as an immediate resource here on Thursdays, the Counseling Center. We are here Monday through Fridays, 8 to 5. We have evening hours by appointment. We also have what's called our In Touch Support and Crisis Line, which is available Sunday through Fridays, 6 to 10 p.m. And I mention that in particular because one of the issues for students may be a sense of not wanting to be identified or known for seeking mental health services. So we've developed both the Let's Talk program and the support and Crisis In Touch hotline that I've mentioned as anonymous resources. Students can seek those out without identifying themselves, without having to give a name. They can simply make contact there. The other opportunities for students who may want to assess how are they functioning currently, and there is an anonymous mental health screening tool available through the Counseling Center's website where a student can kind of check against validated measures, how am I functioning, and take that in as feedback for them about what else, and there are resources then suggested based on their scoring of those things, but again, anonymously, they don't have to identify themselves to anyone to seek that kind of resource. And I think that's another piece about, is it safe, where can I feel safe to not necessarily be called out for identity characteristics and remain safe in doing so. Okay. I think I'm going to close there. If there's more for us to present, well, we can do that, but certainly taking questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Payaris and Dr. Hermes. So at this time, that concludes our panel, but I do want to say thank you very much to our expert panelists. We will move into Q&A. I do want to also mention that we are here on the West Campus, and one of the aspects of participating as a full health system and healthcare colleges is that we do also understand that there may be interest in discussing DACA, undocumented immigrants, and the implications of clinical care. So we've had Dana talk to us about mental health and a series of things and mention a bit about clinical care. Let us know if there's more interest in discussing clinical care. We do believe it's a very important aspect of this, access to care, et cetera. So I'm going to ask for a few housekeeping items as we move into Q&A. We have plenty of time and leave and forgiveness for our panelists and our audience in the room. We do need to reset slightly for our streaming audience. And so I have two wonderful volunteers who will be working with us as we do Q&A. We have a roving mic, and I'm going to ask that anyone who asks a question in the room, please do use the mic so that it's on sound. Otherwise, you'll have our expert moderator of Q&A have to repeat your question. So we're going to ask your ability to do that. And moving forward now, I would actually like to introduce one of my closest colleagues and a valued member and supporter of our task force, Dr. Charu Thakral. She is the Interim Vice Provost for Diversity, and she's going to work with us in our Q&A. So welcome. Thank you.
Okay, I guess we're on. Thank you again for coming and attending this forum today. We all want to make sure that we give you plenty of time for some questions, some just reactions and feedback. So if you don't get a chance to talk today, and I'd love to invite you to send us a note at our diversity.uic listserv email account, which is on our website, and just give us as much feedback, any feedback that comes to mind after this. But I did get handed a few cards before I did come up here. So I was thinking, let's start with the cards on the note cards, and then we'll open it up for anybody else that has some follow-up questions, okay? Okay, so the first question that I'm gonna go through involves understanding more of the statistics about DACA. So what proportion of DACA recipients originate from Mexico or from Asia, the Middle East, etc.? And the second part is, And what does the place of origin mean for the fight for legal status? So I'd love to invite one of the panelists to respond.
I don't know offhand the national numbers by that breakdown in terms of DACA
histories and cultural context. So often, and there's also European origin DACA recipients, right? So oftentimes that's one of the things that people are often surprised. They have an image of what a DACA recipient is, and it's not necessarily what they actually find out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bonita, I'm wondering if there's any sort of thoughts or comments related to just the legal arena and those differences.
Yeah, just as Amalia said, I mean, it doesn't make any difference what country you're a citizen of. You know, your DACA status remains the same. I would just reiterate what Amalia said, is that it's interesting that there are certain groups that are not as vocal as others. You know, I have spoken with the Korean American Community Services on DACA issues, and for that particular group, I know that there actually are a lot of undocumented Korean students who actually never filed for DACA. So it's different communities kind of handle things differently. But in terms of DACA eligibility or legal status, you know, the country of origin has nothing to do with legal status. So.
So we do have a clarification question, which I think is a great one, and that I often have seen in my recent sort of talks or discussions with staff and faculty, of just being misinformed and misunderstanding the definition. So I'm hoping Tanya can chime in on this one. Can you talk more about what does DACA apply to? Who does DACA apply to? In terms of just questions about undocumented, documented, native-born, foreign-born, with parents that are undocumented. Can you clarify that better?
Sure. I'll refer back to the ICER policy report, because it talks about mixed status households, and what that is that maybe there's a citizen sibling, but an undocumented parent, and then a DACA student. So it varies by family, but DACA, if you entered the country before your 16th birthday, and before June 2007, then you're granted permission, right? And exempted from deportation, but it still left out a portion of individuals. So it doesn't impact, and it doesn't cover parents or all undocumented immigrant students. So it does leave a portion of students who are like, hey, if you came 3 days before your 16th birthday, you know, you may be ineligible. If you came a few weeks after 2007, you know, you're ineligible. So it does leave a portion of students who don't have access to this work permit, who may go to a public institution or a private institution and be charged double because they don't have a legal status per se in this country.
Yeah, I would just add to that in the process of applying for DACA, the paperwork and the track record that people had to show, so this includes kind of not just temporary residents here, but kind of longstanding residents here. Usually it required graduating from or getting a GED from a school, so a lot of folks were not eligible because it kind of left out a segment of the population that maybe wasn't able to complete their education for lots of different reasons. So I think that it's important to also understand that DACA did not necessarily include everyone that came here before the age of 16, before 2007. There was a lot of other kind of requirements that made you eligible, or that you needed to prove in order to then finally apply. So some folks were maybe not even able to apply because they were just kind of like Tanya was mentioning, just kind of fell short, so to speak, in one of these criteria. So.
Thank you. The next question is, in particularly, I think there's quite a bit of interest about the student experience. So I want to echo Joey and what she said before, that we're really honored to have you here to share your challenges and your story. There were some follow-ups. One of them in particular was, did you have any challenges of becoming a DACA recipient?
trying to remember. It's kind of been a while since then. But I think that the most important thing was the documentation, like finding the right information to send. Keep in mind that I graduated in 2012, so right after it was announced. So I had pretty good documentation. Like I had my transcripts, my high school information, but I remember just getting even my transcripts from middle school to prove that I've been here since 2007. In terms of my any record that I have been here, I think I was finding out if how I came here was a proper way, or it was if I was gonna get any like if it was gonna be like I guess yeah, if it was gonna be blocked, and I came here and without inspection, but I did got I was stopped by Border Patrol, so that was one of the questions that I had for like to seek like legal services, and finding out if I had a deportation proceeding that I did not know of. So I think that that's important to know in terms of filing for applications, and I think the renewal process was a little bit easier than the initial one, but yeah, I didn't have to show that much proof. And again, I graduated from high school, so I think that also allowed me to apply. And
so there's a follow-up question about really wanting to better understand how DACA has benefited you and your family. If you could speak to that in some way.
I think the first thing that comes up to my mind is getting my driver's license. I think that's a huge relief for a lot of the families. In my experience, my parents back then didn't have the TVDL, the temporary driver's license, here in Illinois. So I was the first one to get a license. Driver's license. So I think that was a big relief, just because we know the collaborations that police officers have with ICE. So just getting stopped for a traffic light or for any violation was a big fear in our family. So I remember just getting that, and moving on to having a work permit and being able to work. I think that was also beneficial. And finding more resources. I think that as DACA opened up, there was a lot of more, I guess, scholarships, but towards like the DACA population, and it left out again a lot of the undocumented students who did not qualify for DACA. But definitely just getting that financial burden from our parents and being able to work and have a better paying job. I think that was the most beneficial in my family, in my experience.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn the questioning a bit to kind of a broader issue. I think this is another great question by one of our audience members. As a U.S. citizen by birth, I have not directly been affected by the rescission at DACA, but I would like to help and to be less apathetic. What can I do to help?
Let me just say a couple of things. I mean, clearly we've talked about a number of things. It depends on where you would like to help, what you would like to do. There's lots of things you could do. One of the things I tell faculty and staff and students who come is like, the university is large, right? We have 30,000 students now this year. We have all these different units. And even though we have an immigration task force, right? And we're trying to implement some policies and measures that will ensure that these resources continue to be offered. You can think about in your individual units and departments, what could you do? What could you do at the level of your unit? Whether that is make things easier for DACA students or undocumented students, Open up scholarships, sometimes scholarships for no good reason, say for citizenships only. Think about how you can support students or even workers. We have many workers, student workers who have DACA. So those are sort of some things that you can do within the institution. Now, outside of the institution, there are the advocacy, there's state level advocacy and federal advocacy that you can inform yourself about and learn more about. And I'm the co-chair of the Student Access Bill Task Force, which deals with state advocacy. So if you have any questions, you can ask me about that. And finally, there's that financial measure. If what most of you can do right now is contribute something, Sharu can talk more about that, but the Office of Diversity, we just created a fund to help. That's an emergency fund, and will hopefully, as we see starting March 5th, our first students are going to be, we know we have a student whose DACA runs out on March 6th. And again, to remind you, if your DACA only, you could not renew if your DACA was renewable after March 5th, right? So we are going to have students who need to finish the semester, who can't work anymore. And so we would like to start fundraising and continue fundraising in order to be able to offer emergency funds for students. So that's also something that we would appreciate a lot of support with.
Yes, and for that, just because it's so important, I don't want to let that fall through the cracks, to get in touch with us about donating funds for these students. You can call Office of Diversity, myself directly. I'm the Interim Vice Provost Associate Chancellor for Diversity at this time. You can also call the leadership in advancement, in the advancement unit, Jeff Neerhoff, and we can walk you through details on how to route that appropriately.
I'd also like, if you come in contact with the student, please refer them to me. We want to make sure that we understand their situation, provide the resources, like what's urgent for them right now. So we're trying to meet with all the students and make sure that we know their cases and what type of support they're needed under the current climate, because we want to plan now to be prepared for them once their DACA is expired. And also make sure that they're aware of the resources. So if you come in contact with the student, it'd be really helpful to me to kind of connect with them and make sure that we get the resources they need to successfully matriculate here at UIC. My business cards are in the back.
Thank you. So at this time, we want to open it up for questions. And Joey Volpe will have the mic. If you could just signal if you want to offer any thoughts or have any follow-up questions to what's been discussed, we'd love to give you some time.
We have a great volunteer who's actually
Okay.
Dr. Peacock has a question.
Thank you very much. This has been so helpful. One of the things I've been wondering about is what proportion of students who are eligible, or young people who are eligible to renew, either here among our students or Illinois, actually did renew. I read a statistic shortly after the October 5th deadline that nationally the estimate was something like 68% of eligible young people renewed, and a large reason they thought for it was, of not renewing, was fear, as well as not having access to the substantial funds that were required. So I'm wondering if anybody has any knowledge here in Illinois or here at UIC what proportion of our students who could have renewed did not. Thank you.
I don't have an exact number. I know we have a large population of students, but I know that 17 were unable to renew, students that I spoke with, just because they may have expired in April, or something happened during their DACA time that caused them to be ineligible, or they're not necessarily not ineligible, but we have students who are getting married, and so they'll be processing through another application. But we got the word out. We did some great fundraising events, and it came down to the finances, giving out money and like, hey, if you need it, let's make sure you get it. So we were able to do that, and Ted was able to help with reviewing applications and talk to a few other students who may have been impacted and explore other options for them.
Were there any other questions? I see a hand in the back. Right. Okay.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Michael Shelikov, and I graduated from UIC from Graduate College, and now I work with UI Health. So I've been an immigrant myself, and I remember when I was applying to universities, including UIC, there was a question about immigration status. And knowing how, some of my friends or colleagues, they're immigrants from other countries too, that was a barrier. That question, if they didn't have legal immigration status, it stopped them right there. Do we know if we have now a notation throughout the electronic application, that DACA, or if you're under the provision of DACA, or if you're, not legally here in the country, it wouldn't affect your admission, or it would not serve as a major barrier for you to be admitted to the university and to receive certain help. So that's one of the questions that I have, and I have a couple of more.
Sure, and I'll ask Jennifer to maybe chime in as well. Jennifer Juarez from Lada's office is also on the task force, but we don't discriminate in admissions as long as students meet the requirements for admissions, or they can be admitted to the institution, depending if the program requires citizenship. And I know that students could complete the common application as incoming freshmen. It may be different for the graduate office, but transfer students have a different application. But in the common app, under country of origin, that's usually how we're able to identify whether a student is undocumented or not, and then reach out to them for the resources that the proper documentation that they need to complete in order to make sure they get in-state tuition, so on and so forth. But I'll let Jennifer Juarez chime in with regards to that.
Yeah, I mean, like Tanya said, there, at least at UIC in the state of Illinois, doesn't, it allows undocumented students and students from different countries to apply. And like Tanya mentioned too, at least the common application UIC moved into the common application, I want to say a few years back. So we, in some ways, don't have really control of what common app might ask. However, internally as an institution, we won't jeopardize or harm a student if they indicate, I'm a foreign student or whatever. So that's not in our policy, which is a good thing. I know states like down south, like in Alabama and Georgia, they're a little more strict with that. So when I did college advising at the high school level, I was always telling the students, make sure that you know where you're applying and that doesn't jeopardize, your admissions. Once a student does become admitted, then from there, like Danny mentioned, there is a form called affidavit. The affidavit is a policy that allows undocumented students who have graduated from a high school in the state of Illinois or have done the GED to then qualify for in-state tuition. So that's something that within the Lattice program, we work very closely with the admissions office to say, hey, if you know of any students or do you know how to answer the questions that an undocumented student might say, how do I qualify for in-state tuition? That's something that we can then assist the students with. And it's a very simple process. A lot of our students, rightfully so, they get really worried, like, do I have to sign anything? Is it something legal? It's nothing, anything crazy. It's just saying, hey, I have been here in the state, for a long time. I am a resident of the state, not a legal one, but at least a resident that, contributes like any other person. So, yeah, so in that sense, I am very grateful that UIC and all of our 3 campuses are very, very good about saying, yes, you're welcomed here, you can apply here. The big hurdle, again, it becomes the finance piece, right? So we're always talking to our parents and students about financial planning, payment plan options. For graduate students, it does look a little different. The finance piece, right? Looking at fellowships. I know within the Lattice program, we do try to support our students as TAs or graduate assistants and research assistants. So when in doubt, you are more than welcome as graduate students to reach out to see how else we can support our students at the graduate level. We are thinking about bigger things about scholarships and stuff, but again, the finance piece always becomes a hurdle because we're a state institution as well. But other than that, just to address your question, yeah, I mean, students are more than welcome, and graduate students as well, to apply.
Thank you. And I have a couple of more questions, and Benita, it would be probably for you, and Janet would be related to Janet. So you mentioned that you help some of the students or a student to adjudicate the case with the RN license. So, and I'm glad that it's happening. My question is it sufficient enough to have a RN license or a RN degree, or is it a requirement now to have an advanced degree, like Masters of Nursing? And also, when students apply, or graduates of UIC apply to Illinois Department of Professional Financial Regulation, is that department mandated to report your status, or do we help them, provide legal services to our graduates, how to apply for professional license, taking into consideration we have great professional schools here at UIC as part of our community?
So in regards to your question, In that specific case of my client, she had a bachelor's degree in nursing, and she was sponsored by a physician's office. The way employment-based sponsorship works in the United States is that there are various levels that somebody can be sponsored, depending on what their degree or educational background is. So, for instance, like for the EB2 employment-based second preference category, you have to have a master's degree or higher. The employment-based third preference category, you can be a skilled worker, requiring just 2 years of experience in something, or a bachelor's degree. And there are also unskilled worker positions that can be sponsored for a green card as well. So it kind of depends on what the position is for which you're being applied. In this particular situation, the RNs are considered what's called Schedule A occupations. They've been determined by the Department of Labor to be there are not many enough U.S. workers to be sponsored for this position. So we did it as a Schedule A occupation position. She happened to have a bachelor's degree in nursing, so we did it as we made the requirements for that position to have a bachelor's degree in nursing and an RN license.
I do want to be conscientious of time, and there is another event scheduled in here shortly, but I know there has been somebody very patient waiting in the back. So I'd love to get you in and then conclude, but also mention that as long as our panelists are available to stick around, I'd love to invite you to come up and speak to them individually, exchange contact information so that you can use them as resources.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Carla Pinto, and I am a first-year Master's of Public Health student. We're currently working on a project in regards to DACA called DACA, Repeal DACA, Repeal Health. And so I want to thank you for this this event. This is awesome. And I have a question in regards to the organizations that are outside of campus that are working to provide resources to our students and their families. I just wonder, how is UIC collaborating with those institutions outside of UIC that can provide those resources, like Illinois Coalition of Immigrants' Rights and Rights to Immigrants and Refugees. Anyway, so like organizations like them and others that are working, how are we collaborating with them to help not only our students but their families as well?
So I'm going to ask one of our collaborators, Dana, if she wants to comment on this piece.
Sure. So one way I'll comment on that is I think one way we can do this, and this may harken back to Amalia's point about how we can be empathetic and kind of demonstrate our awareness of this issue. This is part of my work, and so if you are, it's a little bit easier for me because I focus on immigrant mental health, but I can't do this work without having a relationship with folks at ICER, without being one of the founding members of the Coalition for Immigrant Mental Health. So I think that there's ways we can do that to maybe just acknowledge people in our different departments and our different units who are collaborative by nature in their work, and try to bring in more of those and highlight, I think, and showcase more of that work here on campus. So the word gets out a little bit more about UIC's reach with the community. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess my short answer is, like, I just do it. I just, it's part of my work. But I'd like to know more about what's going on UIC wide to make that more of a kind of a, I don't know, a mission.
Yeah, I would say there's at least 3 areas in addition to research that we're involved in, and that's programming, advocacy, and education, and we work very closely with organizations. So education means that sometimes we as educators are out there working with different organizations. So for example, Tania Cabrera is going to be at the ICER workshop next week to talk about higher education and undocumented status. In terms of advocacy, the Student Access Bill Task Force that I told you about was initiated by UIC, but has members of ICER, Enlace, Latino Policy Forum, and many different organizations. They come to campus and we sort of work together and collaborate together in advocacy. And finally, programming. Because our different faculty who are extensively doing research and in relationships We have a lot of programming. We have a lot of lectures, talks, workshops, and conferences that have to do with immigrant issues, immigrant health, immigrant policy, and we invite a lot of organizations to come and be participants in those events.
Thank you. I know Dr. Peacock had a response as a last minute remark.
Yes, there's a group that, Carla, you may want to get in touch with through the School of Public Health, and it's, I don't know if you've met Grisel Torres, but she's within the Dean's office at the School of Public Health. She does a lot of the connections to community organizations, and there's a group that she's involved with called Public Health Woke that is working a lot on immigrant issues, not just DACA, but broadly immigrant issues, and they're actually planning an event, I think working with ICER and some other organizations in February around, very broadly around immigrant and marginalized populations and access to health. So that's going to be in February. And it's going to be at the SEIU headquarters, so stay tuned. There will be a save the date about that soon.
Thank you, Dr. Peacock. So in closing, I do want to make sure I acknowledge and thank the expert panelists here today with us. I want to thank the audience members for coming physically and also watching us live. And I do want to have at least a special acknowledgement to the provost herself, as well as her team for putting this together. And there's many of her team members here today in the back, Judy, Ryan, Kelsey, and others. So thank you so much for helping us put this together. Yes, we will take a moment. But I also do want to mention, that big question that was posed to us of what can you do? Of course, I have a response that I want to share before we close. You decide what level of responsibility and to what degree you want to get involved with supporting students. And I think a first step, and I don't think this is a high expectation at all from our campus community, is to just be knowledgeable about what's available, these resources that we have on campus, know how to better support and route your students to access these resources. We're not asking you to be experts in each of these areas of the legal implications, the financial implications, the academic implications, mental health, and so on. We're not asking you to be experts. We're asking you to know who those experts are. Take that on as responsibility for your role here on campus as a first step, and really have our students start to engage should they be willing and wanting those resources at their disposal. I think that's something that we can all do. And I encourage you to think about what else you can do to just continue to be educated about how immigration policies are impacting our students in different ways. So thank you again for coming, and we hope to see you at future events because this won't be the last.